It starts with a glance, a word, a mocking tone that cuts sharper than a blade. But most dangerously, it goes unanswered. And in that silence, the seeds of collapse are sown. This isn't about ego. This isn't about pride. This is about power, the kind you only realize is slipping when it's already too late. Let one man mock you, and all will follow. Because the first insult is never just an insult. It is a test. A subtle challenge thrown at your feet, not to see if you're offended, but to see if you're still in control. If you do nothing, the answer becomes clear: you're not. Niccolò Machiavelli, the master of raw political realism, didn't need to spell this out directly. His works breathe it. Between the lines of The Prince and Discourses on Livy is a brutal, inescapable truth. If you allow disrespect once, you teach the world how to treat you. People talk of forgiveness. But Machiavelli understood that tolerating insult is a strategic error. Because humans don't rally behind kindness, they rally behind dominance. Behind the one who shows they can, and will, defend their name. Men must either be caressed or annihilated. There's no middle ground. If you don't respond to an offense, you risk appearing uncertain. And in a world ruled by perception, uncertainty is weakness, and weakness is death. Now look around. It's not just one man anymore. It never is. The moment you let mockery pass, the crowd begins to watch. And when the crowd watches, it waits. They wait to see if you're still feared, still respected, still untouchable. When you do nothing, when you laugh it off, stay quiet, pretend it doesn't matter, you give them permission, not just to mock you, but to disobey, undermine, and eventually replace you. Because mockery is contagious. One joke becomes two, one whisper becomes many, and soon, you're not just being insulted, you're being measured. Measured for weakness, measured for replacement. This is the moment where power begins to shift, not in a loud revolution, but in quiet disobedience. It is much safer to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. Because love is fragile. It turns with the wind. But fear stays. Fear stabilizes power. And once you're no longer feared, even those who once claimed loyalty will begin to test your limits. Machiavelli warned us, power is not about affection, it's about consequence. The masses do not follow virtue, they follow results. And when they see someone insult you without punishment, they will not think, how gracious. They will think, how weak. Think of a king whose crown begins to tilt. He doesn't lose it in battle. He loses it when people stop believing it belongs on his head. That belief dies the moment you let them laugh at you. Take Julius Caesar, the man who stood over the known world. His mistake wasn't arrogance, it was silence. When senators whispered jokes behind his back, he brushed them off. Thought himself too mighty to be wounded by words. But those whispers weren't harmless. They were the start of his murder. Because mockery grows into resentment. Resentment breeds conspiracy. And conspiracy, once it feels safe enough, strikes in broad daylight. The Senate laughed quietly. And later, they stabbed loudly. When insult becomes public and remains unpunished, it tells the masses something dangerous. You can get away with this. And if one can get away with it, why not all? A classroom turns to chaos the moment one student mocks the teacher and faces no discipline. It's not the insult that ruined order, it's the silence that followed. Because people don't follow authority, they follow signals. And inaction is the loudest signal of all. That's why public mockery requires public correction, not out of spite, but out of strategy. You're not sending a message to the mocker anymore, you're sending it to the room, to the nation, to the entire watching world. He who allows offenses to be done to him does not maintain his state. So how do you respond? Not in rage. Not with uncontrolled retaliation. That's emotional, and emotion is vulnerability. No, you strike with precision, with calculation. You don't punish for revenge, you punish to restore fear. Fear is not cruelty. Fear is a boundary. Without it, no power structure survives. Injuries must be inflicted all at once, so that, being tasted less, they offend less. That's Machiavelli's law of retaliation. Strike once, hard, and completely. Make it unforgettable. Not because you enjoy punishment, but because you understand what happens if you don't. Because the moment mockery enters the public, it begins to erode everything built on respect. In government, business, even among friends, if disrespect becomes a strategy with no cost, it becomes a habit. And if it becomes a habit, you are already lost. You cannot beg for dignity. You enforce it. You do not argue for respect. You impose it with clarity and presence. A single act of consequence silences dozens of potential offenders. But a single tolerated insult invites a crowd. And here lies the brutal, simple truth. The world does not test your words. It tests your limits. If insult finds no resistance, it becomes a movement, a trend, a shift in balance. And once momentum moves against you, it's not just hard to stop, it's nearly impossible to reverse. Tolerated insult becomes permission. Permission becomes rebellion. Rebellion becomes collapse. So when that first laugh rings out, understand what's at stake. Understand what's really being said. It's not just disrespect. It's a signal, a message, a challenge. And if you don't answer, someone else will. Because in Machiavelli's world, the one who fails to punish is punished next. But there's a danger in retaliation too. Strike too harshly, and you don't create fear, you ignite hatred. That's the delicate line every ruler, every leader, every individual in power must walk. Because power that is only feared becomes fragile. Resentment begins to simmer. And one day, it boils over. So the question becomes, how do you punish just enough to maintain control, without planting the seeds of your own downfall? There is an art to cruelty. And Machiavelli, for all his ruthless logic, was not an advocate of chaos or blind repression. He understood the psychology of rule. If you hurt too much, too often, or too publicly, you don't just silence your enemies. You make martyrs. You create myths. You inspire revenge. A wise leader, Machiavelli believed, must master measured cruelty. Not kindness, not mercy, not unnecessary brutality, but precision, strategy, restraint. Because a prince who strikes everyone becomes hated. And hatred, Machiavelli warns, is the one force that can undo even the most feared ruler. A prince must make himself feared in such a way that, if he is not loved, he is not hated either. This is balance. This is what most powerful men fail to grasp. They either tolerate too much and lose control, or crush too hard and awaken resistance. Both are fatal. The key is knowing how far to go and when to stop. Imagine a fire. If left alone, it grows out of control. But if you pour too much water on it, you may ruin everything around it. The same applies to discipline, punishment, or retaliation. You must target the flame, not the forest. That means identifying who insulted you, why, and what message their punishment will send. Then act swiftly, cleanly, publicly, but without spectacle. Because if your response feels personal or vengeful, it loses power. It becomes about you. And power is never about you. It's about the message others receive. Machiavelli gives us a perfect example. When Cesare Borgia took control of the Romagna region, it was in chaos, lawless, disobedient, filled with petty warlords. So he brought in a man named Ramiro da Orco, brutal but effective. Orco pacified the region with force. The people feared him. Order returned. Then Borgia had Orco executed, publicly, left his body in the town square. Why? Because the people hated Orco, and Borgia needed to win their favor again, without appearing weak. So he made it look like he too condemned the cruelty, while benefiting from the order it had created. Cruelties well used are those committed once for all, out of necessity. This is the art of controlled violence. Use it when needed, then stop, walk away, and let the silence do the rest. Because once order is restored, the people don't remember the pain. They remember the peace. But if you go too far, if you become obsessed with eliminating every whisper, every critic, every perceived insult, you become a tyrant. And even Machiavelli knew, tyrants don't last. What lasts is fear balanced by reason. Respect rooted in discipline, not in chaos. There's also something else at play here. Something more subtle. Human memory. People remember injustice longer than they remember disrespect. If you hurt someone more than the insult deserved, it burns into them. It fuels obsession. And obsessed enemies are the most dangerous kind. So you must calculate the cost of punishment against the benefit of deterrence. Ask, will this act of control make me safer, or just make me hated? Because once your enemies see you as unjust, not just strong, they will unite, even if they hate each other, because now they have a common monster. Machiavelli was clear, a ruler can be feared, but he must never be hated. Fear earns obedience. Hatred demands vengeance, and that's the fine edge we now walk. Punish too little, and you embolden the masses. Punish too much, and you turn them against you. That's why cruelty must never become habit. It must be rare, sharp, and never for pleasure. Never for ego, only for stability. Because every act of discipline must serve a single purpose: to preserve your authority, not just for today, but for tomorrow. And when the smoke clears, when your enemies are quiet and the room is still, you step back. You don't gloat. You don't flaunt it. You let your silence restore your myth. Because power maintained through mystery is power that endures. But what if you never had to punish again? What if your presence alone, your image, your myth, was enough to silence a room, stop a whisper, and paralyze mockery before it's born? That is true power. Not force, not reaction, but a reputation so sharp, so heavy, it enters the room before you do, and remains long after you've left. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. Because once you've punished, once you've retaliated and silenced your enemies, the next step isn't more punishment. It's crafting fear into legend. Because the greatest leaders in history didn't need to scream. They didn't need to swing the sword again and again. They became untouchable because people imagined what would happen if they were touched. That's when you win. Think of it like a shadow. A presence that looms in conversations, in decisions, even in silence. Your name, your stare, your history, they become warnings. You don't have to lift a finger. You've already written the story in their heads. It is not essential for a prince to have all good qualities, but it is essential to appear to have them. But here's the twist. While Machiavelli speaks of appearing virtuous to the masses, when it comes to your enemies, your goal is different. You don't want to appear good. You want to appear inevitable. You want to become the kind of figure people don't even consider mocking, because the consequences feel carved into stone. Predictable, inevitable, unavoidable, like a storm that always comes when your name is spoken carelessly. That's how you make mockery extinct. Because fear isn't just about what you did. It's about what people believe you're capable of, what you might do, what you don't do. The unknown is more terrifying than the known. And so the silence after your name becomes heavier than a speech. The room slows down. People choose their words differently. Not because you're watching, but because they fear you might be. This is where you stop reacting. You start shaping perception. Because when perception is controlled, reality obeys. Let's break it down. Your image must be constructed like a monument, strong, cold, and distant enough to provoke awe. You speak rarely, but when you do, every word lands like stone. You show, so build the appearance. Curate it. Let stories swirl around your name, some true, some not. Let them wonder which is which. Because when the truth becomes blurred with legend, your power becomes mythic. And no one mocks a myth. Think of historical figures who weren't just leaders, but specters. Vladimir Putin walking in silence through a Kremlin hallway. Napoleon writing notes in exile that still unnerved Europe. Even modern CEOs, warlords, cult leaders, those who cultivate mystery don't lose control. They rule through uncertainty. You don't want people to know your limits. You want them to fear they don't exist. Now let's get practical. How do you do this? You let other people speak of your wrath, not you. You let your actions become rumor, and your stillness become suspicion. You never correct their assumptions. You never clarify the truth. You become a question no one wants to answer. That's how you make yourself unmockable. Because the greatest weapon you possess isn't strength, it's anticipation. They fear what they think you might do. They silence themselves before you even open your mouth. This is how the game changes. You no longer need to punish. You don't need to speak. You simply exist, and that is enough. But even fear expires. Not all at once. Not with an uprising. Not with shouts or fire. It fades quietly, like a myth that stops being told. Like a god whose temples grow empty. You were once the storm they feared. Now, they study the sky and realize the clouds aren't moving. And the most dangerous moment of power is not when you're challenged openly. The prince who is wise will avoid being hated, even if he cannot avoid being feared. You may have survived mockery. You may have punished insult. You may have built a legend. But if that fear turns to hatred, you will be surrounded by silent enemies. And silence is always the final warning. Because fear can be stable, but hatred is restless. It conspires in shadows. It collects in corners. It wears a mask in your presence and sharpens a knife in your absence. You thought silence was respect. But silence is also the sound of planning. The paradox of Machiavellian rule is this. To maintain power, you must not only be feared, but needed. You must balance cruelty with value, discipline with benefit. They must fear you, but also depend on you. Because the moment you become only a symbol of control and nothing more, they will fantasize about your fall. And fantasies become blueprints. So how do you stop this? You become useful. You make yourself indispensable, even to those who dislike you. You hold the keys to their survival, their comfort, their structure. You punish when necessary, yes, but you also protect. You reward loyalty with safety, with order, with advantage. You create a system where even your enemies quietly admit. He keeps the chaos away. That's what Machiavelli meant when he said, "A prince is despised when he is considered fickle, frivolous, effeminate, cowardly, or irresolute. Not when he is cruel, but when he is weak and useless." Your power must provide more than fear. It must provide structure. That way, they fear removing you, not because of your punishment, but because of what follows after you. The unknown, the collapse, the floodgate. If you build your kingdom on fear alone, it will rot from within. But if you build it on fear and order, your enemies hesitate, not because they respect you, but because you've made yourself necessary. Think of the ancient emperors. Some ruled by sword, others ruled by bread. The best ruled with both. When the people benefit from your rule, even if they hate your face, they'll keep you in power. Because behind every rebellion is the same silent question. Will we be better off without him? Your job is to make sure that question always ends in no. That's the antidote to hatred. Utility. Let them dislike you, but never let them replace you. Because once the idea of your absence seems more appealing than your presence, you're already falling. And here comes the final Machiavellian twist. A wise ruler must avoid being hated, but he need not worry about being loved. Love is a liability. Hatred is a threat, but indispensability is armor. And if you wear it well, if your leadership becomes the bridge they fear to burn, then you don't need to be adored. You don't even need to be trusted. You only need to be irreplaceable. Not every empire falls with a war. Some collapse the moment a joke lands. The first time someone mocks you publicly, and people laugh. Not out of nervous fear, not out of politeness, but genuinely, openly, collectively. That moment, when fear turns into amusement, is the moment your throne begins to crack. Because as Machiavelli understood, authority is a performance. It must be staged, curated, controlled. And laughter is chaos. Laughter is uncontrollable. Laughter is infectious. Laughter destroys illusion. It is the ultimate equalizer. And it is the final stage of disrespect. Men in general judge more by the eye than by the hand, because it belongs to everybody to see you, but to few to understand you. Machiavelli. People don't analyze power. They observe it. They feel it. They absorb your image. So when the people no longer flinch at your name, but chuckle, when the myth you built becomes a meme, you have already lost the psychological war. The real danger isn't that they laugh. The danger is what comes after they laugh. They begin to feel brave. They begin to say the unspeakable. They begin to question the untouchable. And worst of all, they start to share those jokes. And the moment a ruler becomes shareable, memeable, mockable, he is no longer feared. He is content. And content can be skipped. It starts small. An impersonation. A cartoon. A viral whisper. They laugh in bars. They laugh in bedrooms. And soon, they laugh in boardrooms. The laughter becomes normalized. The fear dissolves. And what remains? Ridicule. Ridicule is the death of command. Because once your name no longer carries weight, it becomes light. And things that are light get thrown. This is why Machiavelli insisted on preemptive control of reputation. He knew, respect is hard to gain, but easy to lose. It is much safer to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. But what if you are neither feared nor loved? Then you are forgotten. Or worse, mocked. And this is where many powerful men fail. They think public image is vanity. They think reputation is soft. They think mockery is just noise. But in the age of perception, mockery is a weapon. It spreads faster than truth. It hits harder than facts. It transforms rulers into punchlines. And once you're a punchline, people stop listening. They stop obeying. They stop caring. Because people do not follow leaders they can laugh at. Only those they can laugh with or fear. And Machiavelli, centuries ago, warned, if you lose control of your image, you lose control of the people. So what do? You respond swiftly to ridicule. You crush the first joke before it spreads. You make an example of mockery, because allowing one person to laugh at you gives permission for all to laugh. It's not about ego. It's about precedent, because precedent becomes culture. And once the culture laughs, the power dies. The fall of tyrants isn't always tragic. Sometimes it's a comedy. The dictator whose photo becomes a meme. The prince whose voice is imitated in playgrounds. The general whose speeches become TikToks. This is the modern battlefield of power. And laughter is the bullet. Never tolerate the first laugh, because behind every laugh is a loaded rebellion. He who becomes master of a city accustomed to freedom and does not destroy it, may expect to be destroyed by it. Replace freedom with mockery, and the lesson still holds. Control the tone of your myth, or others will rewrite it for laughs. You thought the worst thing that could happen was to be hated. You were wrong. The worst thing is to be forgotten. No resistance, no slogans, no graffiti, not even a joke, just nothing. Because when people fear you, they still acknowledge your power. When they mock you, they still speak your name. But when they forget you, you are already dead long before your funeral. Machiavelli warned rulers not only of revolt and rebellion, but of irrelevance. The forgotten prince loses not with a bang, but with silence. The halls he once walked echo not with whispers, but with dust. The people he once ruled don't curse him. They don't bless him. They simply move on. And that is the final failure of any leader. To become invisible. To lead for years and leave no myth behind. Because Machiavelli understood that power is not just about control. It's about legacy. And legacy is written by memory. A prince should live in such a way that nothing can be said of him which is not full of praise. Machiavelli. But when nothing is said of him at all, that is the final insult. Because men do not fear what they forget. They do not follow what they forget. And they do not fight for what they forget. And so the forgotten ruler is worse than the defeated ruler. Because at least the defeated one is remembered. At least he leaves behind a name, even if carved in hatred, even if bathed in fire. But the one who is erased is the one who never truly existed. You may ask, how can a man with all the power in the world be forgotten? The answer? He lets himself become ordinary, predictable, dull. He stops crafting the myth. He stops maintaining the illusion. He assumes the people will remember, simply because they once did. But memory is a garden. It must be watered. It must be tended, or it withers. Throughout history, we find leaders who outlived their power, not because they were defeated in war, but because they faded into the background of their own rule. They spoke less. They inspired less. They punished less. They became cautious, soft, silent. And when silence reigns in a palace, the whispers begin in the streets. Because if you do not dominate your own story, others will write a new one, without you in it. A wise prince must always follow a path that seems new, even if it is old. Translation? You must renew yourself, again and again. Change your skin, change your voice, reignite fear, or provoke awe. But never, ever become expected. Because expected leaders become background noise. And background noise gets muted. Ask yourself, what are people still saying about you when you're not in the room? If the answer is nothing, you're already gone. If the room goes silent when your name is spoken, your presence still lives. If people lean forward, you still exist in their minds. But if they shrug, you're done. So what does Machiavelli teach us here? Stay dangerous. Stay remembered. Or prepare to be replaced. In the grand theater of power, if you're not the performer, you're the past. All throughout history, the greats, those who lasted, didn't just fight back. They erased. They didn't simply silence insult. They buried it, burned the letters, exiled the poets, poisoned the laughter, because they understood what Machiavelli whispered between the lines. Men ought either to be well treated or crushed, because they can avenge themselves of lighter injuries, but not of more serious ones. If you only slap the man who mocked you, he may return with 10 more. If you banish him, he may write his revenge into legend. But if you destroy his platform, erase the memory of his insult, and make it costly for anyone to remember it, you've rewritten the future. This is not about cruelty. This is about control. Control over perception. Control over narrative. control over memory itself. In this world, mockery is a virus. If you don't eliminate it fast, it spreads. One man mocks you today and walks away untouched. Tomorrow, 10 more try. Next week, your allies laugh with them. By next month, they forget you ever demanded respect. So what must a ruler do? Crush insult so completely that its memory becomes a cautionary tale. You don't make an example of your enemies. You make an example out of their defeat. Their silence must echo. Their fall must inspire fear. Their fate must remind everyone what happens to those who dare to mock. Because in Machiavelli's world, mercy is a luxury. But fear? Fear is insurance. And here's the deeper, darker truth. Sometimes, the people don't need to see the punishment. They just need to feel it happened. A closed door, a missing face, a shift in the wind. Suddenly, no one laughs anymore. Suddenly, your name carries weight again. And no one can say why, but they all know. That's real power. The kind of power that doesn't argue, doesn't shout, doesn't beg to be respected. It simply is. But let's end with a modern twist. In our world today, mockery spreads faster than ever. Through memes, tweets, videos, whispers. A single joke can go viral in minutes. So what's the answer? It's not always violence. It's not always fire. But it is clarity. The clarity that says, I will not tolerate insult. Not today. Not ever. That message, when delivered without apology, becomes your armor. It becomes your myth. And in a world addicted to laughter, you become the man no one dares laugh at. So remember, from part 1 to now, the core of Machiavelli's warning is this. Let one man mock you, and all will follow. But if you crush him, if you erase the moment, if you burn the laughter out of the room, then no one follows. Because they remember, you are not the man to mock. You are the man they fear, the man they respect, the man who writes history, not the one it laughs at. And if you've made it this far, then you are the kind of mind that understands power is not a game. It's a war of perception. So subscribe. Follow this journey. Because here, we don't do comfort. We do truth, raw, sharp, and Machiavellian. This was TruMinds, where power speaks and weakness gets edited out. Like, share, subscribe, and remember, never tolerate insult.